Hello, everyone. Todd Staples here with the third part of the 50th episode and the final episode of the Learn to Win podcast. I am so excited for today's show because we are reflecting on 50 episodes that we've done over the past year. And not only that, but we have some big news. Scrimmage, the company that has sponsored the Learn to Win podcast that I've been working with for the past year, has been acquired by a fantastic company and a phenomenal team. The company is called Acto, and we're not going to get into it too much on this episode, but we do have Parth Khanna, the CEO of Acto, on the episode today to join Derek and I reflecting on the past 50 episodes and everything we've learned to have a discussion about the future of mobile learning and training. This final episode is just like the last two, where we reflect on specific guests, specific topics and technologies that we've talked about and how they are going to be the future of mobile learning and training. We talk about using real-time data to measure people's openness to learning and to identify your absolute top performers so those people can be modeled and emulated throughout your organization. We talk about the role of immersive learning experiences using augmented reality and virtual reality and how that can create higher engagement and better retention long-term. We talk about using AI and machine learning to identify skills gaps and then create custom learning plans so the people who need work in certain areas get the right content, the right training at the right time that works best for them. We talk about trust, which is a huge issue. The more data we start to share with each other, with the company we work for, with applications that we use, the more trust is becoming the commodity of the future. I'm really excited for this episode, and I'm happy to welcome Parth Khanna to the show. And I'm so appreciative of all of our listeners and people who've watched our videos. It's just been a wonderful journey. I've learned a lot, and I hope the things that Derek and I and the guests we've had on the show have shared with you have made an impact. Thank you so much for giving us your time and attention, and let's cut right into the show.
So I am super happy to welcome you to the final installment of the Learn to Win podcast. And today we have a very special guest, my friend and fellow entrepreneur, founder and CEO of Acto, Parth Khanna.
Parth, me as well. I echo Derek's sentiments. Welcome to the show. It's so great to have you here and talk about the big news a little bit.
Thank you. It's my honor to be here, and it's our honor to be joining forces with Scrimmage and together really redefining what life sciences industry is capable of.
Thank you, Parth. It's an honor and humbling to be both with you here and in general as we start to build this next version of our combined company. It's very exciting. And congratulations to you and the entire Acto team and the leadership team on this next milestone. It's very, very exciting. So the structure of and some of the interview clips that we've weaved in, which I'm going to ask for Parth's feedback on, is around the future of education and training and around innovation as it pertains to healthcare and personalized learning.
So Derek, thinking back on those 50 episodes, what were one or two of the key things that we need to look out for as we're moving towards the future of mobile learning and training?
Well, I'm super excited just regarding technology in general, but especially for how it's informing learning and how people interact with content generally. So one of the topics we talked about was the role of biometrics, right? And I think back to the interview we did around being able to see people in real time engaging and having their emotionality in response to the content that they're viewing or their physiological response to the content that they're viewing. We had a couple different interviews on those topics. And I think that it's fascinating to get to the point now where you can actually see people's pupils dilating, see their heart rate changing or observe it through the technology that they're using. And that is going to change how we build content and how people experience content digitally and eventually when we're back in live and in-person live experiences again.
One of your guests that I found so fascinating in their insights was Paul Zak and the relationship between physiology and biofeedback in learning. And well, we do know these things are interrelated, but to be able to tie those two dots together was just fascinating.
I just had a conversation with Paul a week or so ago. They've now taken their technology, which taps into any sort of Fitbit, Apple Watch, any sort of wearable, and can track through your heart rate how immersed you are in the content. And just recently, they've created that as a real-time measurement device. So you can literally see as you're giving a training, as you're onboarding people, as you're showing a new advertisement or new marketing campaign, you can see in the moment how effective that is at getting their attention and actually inspiring them to take action. So let's take a look at that clip now.
Really, we're looking at why people were motivated to take actions at a distance. Like if I talk to you, Derek, maybe I'm a persuasive guy, I can get you to do something. But why do we respond to movies? Why do we respond to advertisements? Why do we remember when a great teacher tells us something? That's kind of weird, right? That our brains are so somehow socially engaged with an experience that we're like, oh man, I got to do something. So through about 20 years of research, we identified the underlying neurochemicals and brain areas that motivate action after experience. And in doing that, we identified this neurologic state we call immersion, in which you're attentive to what's happening around you, but you also emotionally are engaged by it. So you really care about it. And that seems to be a general evaluation mechanism in the brain. We're always evaluating things. Do I want to talk to you? Do I want to get a sip of water? What am I doing? So all animals have this. And what we've been able to do is then create software as a service so anybody can measure this anywhere in real time. And that allows us to give people rapid feedback and create great experiences, which we all want.
Absolutely. So, with Scrimmage, we all are about personalized learning, right? Obviously, if you're reading someone's individual reaction to an experience, whether it be educational or otherwise, you could see the impact for how that would apply, especially for driving just greater levels of activation, engagement, continuous development, and really building curricula in such a way that, gets the desired goal either for that person or whatever the objective they're trying to meet is, right? So tell us a bit more about the technology itself in terms of how you're measuring people's emotive response or their level of engagement with content that is being produced.
So let me go back on the neuroscience. So when you have an experience that's fabulous for you, that experience is tagged in your memory with emotions. So this is why it's easy to remember, major experience of your life, birth of a child, 9/11, things that are really outstanding. Yeah. But this happens even at lower levels, not even peak experiences. And so once you tag that with emotion, that experience, again, is kind of like a little nudge in your brain. You want to do more of this, and you certainly remember it more easily. So that's kind of the key. So once we identified the brain processes that create an immersive experience, then we said, but you don't want a bunch of PhDs in your office every time you want to measure this, because otherwise it's too expensive, it's too slow. And you've met PhDs, Derek, they talk funny, they smell funny. You don't want them in your office. That's the last thing you want, right? So could we actually automate all the signal processing so that we can measure immersion second by second? And that's what we've done with a wearable sensor and cloud computing.
Obviously, in the world that we're living in now, regarding working from home and everyone's, experiencing the world differently, the beauty of, virtual reality and augmented reality, I think, is really going to shift, or potentially it could shift. And the work that was even done, going into the pandemic, where physicians could get trained on respirators and ventilators, but even just beyond that, in terms of how procedures are facilitated, how classrooms are done, there's so much more we can do to build, immersive and virtual worlds that we can actually interact in. And I think that's something else that we're going to see increasingly used over the next decade, where people can literally be in simulated environments, experiences, and practice almost like in the Matrix.
So now that we talked about immersion neuro and the neuroscience of how people are immersed in something, I want to cut to a shot from Maxim Ross, whose company immerses you into an experience using augmented reality and virtual reality. And his technology literally puts the trainee in the operating room. Let's check out what Max has to say.
This is a continuum, in fact. If you take the learner journey, there are other media, other tools that have to be implemented into this learner journey.
Yeah.
So for us, VR, due to the immersive aspect, give you the emotional engagement, allowing the learner to learn better, in fact. It makes the content stick in his memory.
So one of the coolest things about AI, in my opinion, is the way that the computer, the machine, learns about the individual or the participant that's interacting with it. So when you think about Alexa, you think about Google Home, and the questions that you ask it, the interactions that you have with it, or if you're interacting even on search, it starts to collect information about what's relevant for you or what's a challenge or a need for you. So in the context of learning, the data is going to start getting better at making recommendations on here's a course or here's a skill area that might be helpful for someone to work on. There'll be technology that recommends that next step, and it can actually help to facilitate people in the conversation with their clients or with their partners on how to be more present and to show up in a powerful way for that audience.
Derek, what's really interesting is taking that notion of AI helping us identify the right learning behaviors and arriving at that conscious competence is to take it to the next level, which is using AI to now pulse out and push out the right content at the right time. And also targeting that content to a person's gaps. And again, big data and AI first and foremost allows us to study a person's learning behaviors and identify the gaps. And one analogy that I love sharing is, let's say I have vitamin B12 deficiency because I don't eat my fruits and vegetables. What would be a remedy in that situation? You would give that person a supplement for vitamin B12. The same way, if I'm a learner and there's a certain competency that I'm not growing in, I would give them that targeted content to supplement that area. For example, in the context of pharma training, we talk about clinical fluency being a difficult area for a lot of pharma reps where they have that deficiency. So give them content for clinical fluency. And now the power of AI is to be able to not only know that clinical deficiency is the clinical fluency is the deficiency for this particular rep, but to be able to, in a timely manner, pulse out that content so it has a maximum impact for them. So it really is a new horizon and a new world for folks in learning and how AI can be leveraged.
Partha, I totally agree with that too. And it just makes it more interesting for the learner, right? That's what it's all about, is making it engaging and relevant and only what they need. Like in your example, the vitamin B12 deficiency. We did a great webinar with Tiffany Price, who does a lot of consulting, and she's got some great points at AI. So let's cut to that now to hear a little more about what we learned in the past season about exactly what you're talking about.
With artificial intelligence, what is different with this wave of technology is the fact that it's not only going to disrupt the blue collar workers that we generally see disruption at that level. We're also going to see disruption at the white collar level and across the board, across society, because of the proliferation of artificial intelligence. This is definitely where we see that CEOs are saying 54% of the workforce needs to be upskilled, reskilled in the next 5 years. I think that's still going to be the case. Maybe it's selling skills, build that up. Maybe it's soft skills. Maybe it's some foundational skills. Because regardless of the economic situation, we're still going to see that AI and machine learning transformation within our organizations. I was looking over very recent articles in ATD and Training Magazine, looking at artificial intelligence, not just to say, oh, it's a shiny new toy, but how do we leverage this technology to do things differently and upskill people in a way that we haven't even thought of before? So don't just use it as a classroom or an e-learning, replacement. Let's holistically, strategically think differently in how we can upskill, reskill, and engage our folks.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, I think even in this kind of environment, we need to do a better job about growing our employees and seeing potential and then bringing them in the organization. And then they will need to reskill, upskill regardless, because everything is going to be moving. The bar is going to be raised constantly with technology being rolled out in our organizations. So understanding where those gaps are is going to be important. Understanding where maybe their experience level is not as much as you would like, but is there an opportunity to partner with them in the organization so they could learn on the job? So those are just things I want to throw out there. And I think it's up to us as learning and development professionals to kind of help the business understand how critical that is, that we have those opportunities. And again, we're flying the plane as we're building it, right? So, and especially right now, that's going to be the case, I'm thinking, for the next year or two.
Yeah. And what Scrimmage is doing as it relates to this is actually using AI to help identify those skill gaps.
Mm-hmm.
So what has worked previous employees on X, Y, and Z, and how can we tailor this person's actions based on other people's success, if that makes sense.
What I find really fascinating is the concept of this unconscious competence, which is a lot of successful folks, they don't know why they're successful. And that's really an opportunity for AI to help us understand and to help us go from unconscious competence to conscious competence. And as an example, you might have a sales rep who right before their meeting is referencing a certain paragraph on a document, maybe it's a brochure or a sales literature, and that has some sort of messaging or some ideas that really are resonating with the customers. And the question is, how do we capture that? How do we capture that insight? And that's really where opportunity for AI to go through and crunch through learning behaviors of high performers and identify those patterns.
I think using the machine learning and the AI is so valuable to figure out what your best performers do with their time. How are they consuming the training? Are they going through it very slowly and methodically, or are they going through it at a quick pace and then going back through it to reinforce that knowledge? So it's really interesting. We had some great people on the show. One in particular was Steve Cunningham from Read It For Me, discussing how people learn.
And what we realized was that the people who were buying it from us were people who were already successful. So I had this huge customer list of people who are on the Forbes billionaires lists and leading amazing entrepreneurial companies. And so the people who were already successful were the ones who were using it. And so that started a journey of understanding how the world's most successful people learn. And it's much different than how most other people learn. And so what I realized, nothing that I'll say here is going to be new or revolutionary. And it's kind of what I try to impress on people when I'm talking about it is, it's not so much whether or not you know what I'm about to tell you, is like, are you doing it? And is this part of your practice? That's what matters. Because you can talk to somebody about the principles from the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and that doesn't really matter. What matters is like, are you continuing to practice those things? So with that in mind, that's one of the things that successful people do is they have a purpose for why they're reading. They don't just mindlessly consume information. They have a problem that they're trying to solve. When we first started talking to companies, they would always talk about this thing called the Kirkpatrick evaluation model. And I don't know if you've bumped up against this in your work, but it's this pyramid, and there's different levels of effectiveness. And they would always tell us, well, here's how we're going to evaluate your program. And depending on which level you're at, you're more valuable to our company. So level 1 is at the bottom of the pyramid, and that's reaction, which is like, did people like the training? Level 2 is learning, which is, did we walk out of the training with some new concepts? And so this could be, watching a video. This could be attending an in-live lecture or training or workshop. Level 3 is, did it change your behavior? Level 4 is, did this produce the intended results, hopefully results that are beneficial to the business? And so I had assumed from the get-go that, well, if everybody's talking about this, they must be doing all those things. They must be tracking all of these things. It took me a very long time to ask people like, well, tell me how you're tracking all of that stuff. And as it turns out, most people are not tracking hardly any of that stuff. And what I learned was that nobody tracks behavior. And when I say nobody, the people who do track behavior, who say they track behavior, actually just send surveys out asking people if they've applied anything that they learned from that training they took 6 months ago, which is not anywhere close to tracking behavior. And if you don't track the behavior, you've got no way to figure out if it produce the results that you're looking for. And so that for us was an opportunity to start thinking about how would you do that? How would you track behavior to then track results? And that led us into just looking at how the world's most successful people did it, and looking in different areas of the psychology and biology and other practices where it's very important for people to create results. It's like when you're flying an airplane, like it's very important that the airplane lands safely. And so there are certain things that they do in that environment for pilots to make sure that that happens, and in surgeries. And as it turns out, that is just what those types of behaviors is what the world's most successful people do.
So I just want to reiterate how awesome it's been working with you, Todd, and for our listeners and our guests who have joined us for Learn to Win. It's been really fun learning together and to share information and to share experts with people on all different topics. and really appreciative of all the people who have spent time listening to these episodes, and hopefully you've received a lot of value that you're applying to your own lives and your own learning journeys. So looking forward to what's next.
Derek, it has just been a pleasure to work with you and learn from all of our guests and even from our listeners who've contacted us and engaged. I've learned a lot from you being on the show, and it's been just a really special experience over the past year to do these 50 episodes and share things with our audience. And I just really enjoyed it, and thank everyone for tuning in and listening.
Todd and Derek, thank you for having me on. It was such a pleasure. And to all of our listeners, be sure to check out the Launchpad podcast on October 7th. We're super excited about Acto and Scrimmage coming together. And on that podcast, we'll talk about the story behind both organizations and, more importantly, the future of learning in life sciences.
Parth, it was great to have you on. Thank you so much for coming. And I'm so excited to join you on the next stage in the journey.
Hey, it's Derek again. Thanks again for joining us on Learn to Win. To see all of our episodes, go to podcast.wescrimmage.com and follow us on social media @WeScrimmage.